All right. Good evening, everybody. Let's see. Let me pull in my colleagues who will be joining me for this town hall. While I do that, I definitely want to thank Dr. Burrows for that great job moderating, and my colleagues for their comments and presentations. And to all of you who were and are continuing to chat. Shout out to all of my students who I hope are still with us. And to everyone else, I think. Yes, hello, Sylvia, Cameron, everybody. All right. Before we get started, please, to those who are joining us in the audience, please start to go ahead and submit your questions in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom. All right, what's up, Laurent? And particularly to those of my students, if you have any questions about anything from something that was mentioned as a term or historical reference or a concept, please don't hesitate to raise that or any other question. But while we're gathering all of that, I wanted to ask either of those who are here, let me make sure, if Dr. Ichile or Konadu, you have any comments or questions for each other. Sorry, Ms. Boggs. That was unintentional. Forgive that. Njiba. Yeah.
I had a question.
Yes.
My question was for Kwesi Konadu, because like I heard, no, I kind of almost wanted you to keep going at the end of your talk with Todd. I wanted to hear more about, so you kind of deconstructed the whole naming of us, right? But I'm curious, kind of moving back towards this question of identity, like who gets to choose the name? Who's if we're the lions and we leave the cage and decide to like name ourselves, like who's the lions? Who are the lions? You know, and that goes back to Todd's question about Jessica Krug and like this question of blackness. Now that we have people who are black passing, who's in the club, right? And you know, because you gave this idea of like getting kicked out of the club. Who's in the club?
Right. Thank you. I see you're already picking on me.
No,
it's a joke.
Down in your paper, but you didn't get to talk about it.
Sure. So, quick, very, very quick historical background. So essentially, the earliest what we know about the history of Africa is that basically, up until maybe 300,000 years ago, when sort of the last waves of people who out-migrated from Africa left to populate Eurasia, ultimately the Americas and then the island on which I was born, much later, is that there was a decision made, which is what I want to focus on. There was a decision made for people who out-migrated, and that would culturally transform with environment, with choices that are made in those ecologies in Eurasia. And by Eurasia, I mean the outer western end is what became Europe. As we know, Europe is not a continent, it's actually a peninsula, the far western end of Eurasia. And then the other on the east of Eurasia is China, right? So that's Eurasia. And eventually crossing the Bering Straits into North Canada, North America, and so on. So those who decided to stay is what I'm saying. The descendants of those people decided to stay, and who were conveyed through the mechanisms of transatlantic slaving, right, to the Americas. Those people and those who chose to leave have to make a choice. So it's sort of like a Google survey, right? Or Moodle survey when you're told to, or Doodle survey when you're told, to choose. And I'm saying that the people who were the descendants of those who chose to stay in Africa and were forcibly migrated, and those who left on their own by choice earlier, descendants of those people, both parties have a choice. And I'm saying, therefore, they have to choose. And once we know whom wants to be, as the bridge term, African, right, then those people decide what to call themselves, if at all, to call themselves something. And the key, what I'm trying to focus on here, is that those people who self-consciously claim to be African should know whom else does so they can organize, because that for me has been the underbelly for the lack of realization in the movements and organizations that have been mounted over the past few centuries, is that people keep having that lion fight about who is the king of the corner of the cage, and not reconciling, well, who's the lions and who are the chimpanzees, right? We got to figure out the who first, and then we can decide, okay, now we know whom we're defining, whom we are. Then we can decide, okay, what are we fighting for as whom? Because we can't fight, as some intransient, multiracial blob, right? Because then you end up fighting for nothing, because you're fighting for everything, right? And so that's the difficult thing, where I'm trying to par it down to something simple. Say, hey, if the four of us or five of us is glad to say that we're culturally African, hey, now we know what we're fighting for, right? Now we know, whom, has our back, our fronts, and our sides. Now we can organize. Now we can say, okay, let's decide, okay, what we're fighting for and how we're going to fight for it, because we know whom in our equation. So that's really the gist of what I'm saying. So it's more of a choice, which, as I argue in the paper, has never been phrased that way before. People are trying to define who you are for you, right? Jesse Jackson, a bit from Garvey, from Du Bois, and others. And I'm saying that we have to make it a question that people from both camps of descendants have to decide. And then we can figure out the who and the what and the how.
Jared, I don't want to hijack, and I'm not trying to be reductive. Thank you so much for explaining that, because that was super clear, Kwesi. And I'm not trying to be reductive, and I'm not trying to be funny, but it almost sounded like you were saying, it's a choice, and that's empowering, right? For us to be able to make the choice for once about, in this era of who we are, and then move in a direction. But like going back to the beginning, Jessica Crook made a choice. She decided she wanted to be African. So
I was going to ask the same thing. And I was even thinking, remember when John Kerry's wife said, because she was born in South Africa, that she is now an African American? I think it is hilarious that I also am one having this question, but I have it.
Yeah. Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Okay. So I figured, and I sort of expected that kind of pushback, because it's obvious, because there's no easy way around it. So the simplistic view that I put forward is really try to make something very challenging, very simple. But what I am also saying is this: that's why I framed it in terms of the descendants of those who chose to stay, right? They're the ones that have priority in this. They're the ones that need to opt in or opt out. In other words, they're the ones that are or were either made or compelled or seduced into feeling that they had to justify being African, right? And so they're the ones that are usually on the fence, if they claim to be African. And what I'm saying is that those are the ones that I'm targeting. And so, as I framed it in the paper, that this is less, a debate upon which you have to choose sides. It's more of an IQ test. It's like, you're looking at the sum total of ancestry. And so I think ancestry, and I don't mean by that the DNA test that Ancestry.com offers. I don't mean that. And someone can say, well, I'm 1/20th African. Do I qualify? No, it's not a reparations fund that you have to make a claim to prove. What I'm saying is that it's arithmetic, is that for those whose ancestors chose to stay in Africa consciously over the long period of time, they're the ones that have to make that decision, right? They're the ones, for whom it's on the table. They're the ones that have been, I think, consistently pushing back against empire, against the predation of slavery and colonialism, saying those are the people that have to decide.
Okay.
Agreed.
I definitely hope we have time and would invite us to double back on any of these. But I do want to see if we can push through to get to some of these questions. Several of the ones we have all relate to the concept of Pan-Africanism. One here says, in terms of Pan-Africanism, what would your call to action be to us, the next generation of African-American scholars? That was, sorry, just lost the other one. That was certainly one. There was another one I saw that came in here that was of a similar nature, but more or less, at least for now, would anybody want to tackle this question about what would you suggest going forward for future scholars considering these issues in terms of the imperative of an approach to Pan-Africanism? And then maybe similarly in your response to fold in some of these other questions, what impact on Pan-African consciousness do you all think the film Black Panther, and I would expand it to all of Boseman's work, has had on your view of Pan-Africanism as a method or tool for organization? Mjiba, did you unmute? Yeah, go ahead.
I unmuted myself because I feel like I'm kind of doing the chat, but I feel like since I kind of, I mean, I am a Pan-Africanist and I do some work on Pan-Africanism, so perhaps I should say something. Not like my arm is being twisted, but if I don't say anything, I probably would be disappointed in myself. So I think that when we think about this Pan-African struggle, we're reminded that it's a protracted struggle, right? A struggle in which we all have our contributions to play, and a struggle in which that will not be won overnight, right? So like if I'm thinking about the contributions that Marcus Garvey made, and Kwame Nkrumah made, and Sekou Touré made, and Shirley Graham Du Bois, and Claudia Jones, and all of these, people these great Pan-Africanists that came before us, I would suggest that we must all make our contributions to liberating Africa and African people, to the liberation and unification of Africa, wherever we happen to be, because we recognize that Africa's primary, right? And I think the thing is that sometimes for those of us who were born and perhaps raised in the West, or born and still live in the West, or perhaps came to the West, we are confused about the primacy of Africa, right? People cannot defend themselves without land and resources. The land and resources of African people is the African continent, right? And so that's not to say that everyone has to get up and move to Africa. But the reality is that if and when Africa, or not if and when Africa finds herself unified, African people around the world's lives will change. So what can we do as scholars? Well, number one, I think we should study and teach and write about Pan-Africanism. I think that we should have discussions and talks and challenge and push back. And Kwame Nkrumah in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare talks about this zonal analysis. He says that, and he's talking about a military space, right? This is written in '68. And he says that there's 3 zones: an enemy-held zone, a contested zone, and a liberated zone. Now, we know in these institutions that are neo-colonial, many are not going to be 100% liberated, right? If you're getting federal funds, if you're getting any of these other other things from neo-colonialists or U.S. imperialists, clearly you won't be 100% liberated. But can we find contested zones or liberated zones in those spaces to push Pan-African theory, to decolonize? Because the reality is we have to train the next cadre of Pan-Africanists to push Pan-Africanism from the unions to the McDonald's counter to, you know, the construction workers, to the teachers, to everybody, because Pan-Africanism is not just something that should be stuck and stay in the academy. Pan-Africanism is a mass-based movement. That's one. And the second thing in regards to this film, I think that the best thing that Black Panther did was get people talking about Africa, right? I think that people brought out their 1982 China-made, I like China, but they're China-made dashikis, right? They were excited about the fact that Africa could potentially be a leader in the world. And so while we recognize that it made billions of dollars or millions of dollars for Hollywood, and it ultimately did not enrich the masses of people, it got African people around the world to do two things: identify with Africa, recognize that they probably came from Africa, and then also begin to see that Africa truly could, if Pan-Africanism existed, right? Not in the current state. Once Africa is unified and free from foreign domination, IMF, World Bank, all these other things, you know, US imperialism, the world will change. And so those are the things that I'm thinking about.
I just got a question sent to me that I want to ask you all to consider, because it does ask us to back up here a little bit, but it's specific to something that was raised by me and then all of us. Forgive me the mispronunciation, but before any of you continue, I would, as we consider, and then I have some pushback on Professor Freya Watt's comments on the impact of the film, but in part because of this question that I know I have gotten personally a lot, and it comes from Tavon, so forgive me if I mispronounce the name. So if that's the case, they write, people who are of mixed race and or primarily Black African, but also other races, will their choice of deciding to fight this plight or not hold the same weight, and should they be included? In other words, if I could extend to Mjiba what you were just saying there, if Black Panther and other Boseman and other films encourage this view of Africa, where then do so-called mixed race folks fit into that? Do they? Anyway, because in response to that question, go ahead. Yeah.
So first of all, let me just say this. I want to make sure I'm real clear. My mothers are European, but I'm an African. I'm going to say that again. My mother's European, but I'm an African. Mm-hmm. I'm down with people who identify with being mixed, being multiracial, being multicultural, being all of these things. That's fine. In a society that is utopian. We are not living in a utopian society, right? We are living in a society in which Black and brown people are killed indiscriminately because of their Africanness. So while I understand that people want to identify as being mixed race, I would suggest that if in fact people are quote unquote of mixed race, right? But they identify with being African culturally and historically, are they not Africans? Now, and again, I think that there's this new wave of, I'm trying to be politically correct, right? There's this new wave of ambivalence, right, around quote unquote what it means to be a person of mixed race or mixed heritage. But if we look at the lineage of African people in the diaspora, up until before this new wave came about of this sort of romanticization of what it means to be other, African people are mixed with multiple different things. So at what point does an African who was a product of found themselves in the US or Latin America or wherever, or Jamaica or the Curacao, wherever, at what point are they authentically African? Is it when they got off the ship? Is it 400 generations? Or so for me, I think Africanness is also very political, right? And I think that there's a push, and I'm sorry to say this, and I'm not trying to disrespect nobody who identifies with being mixed race, or nobody who has a contradiction with people who identify with being mixed race. But we have to be clear that this new push around what it means to be mixed or multiracial is a push against what it means to be African, okay? That's what it is, straight up, point blank. It's a push away from a power base, which is a land base. Because this is not the only time and the only space in which people of mixed race or multi-heritage who come from Africa existed. That's it. I know Todd said we were so eloquent. I am not the eloquent one. Thank you very much.
Anybody else on either of these tabled comments or questions? That is the carrying forward of the Pan-Africanism as a concept, or the place of so-called mixed descended Africans in this struggle for Pan-Africanism. Yes.
So thank you for your impassioned response, Sister Mjiba. This could be just, again, an oversimplification, but I feel like people of African descent who have, kind of a phenotypically visible amount of other ancestry from other places have the same choice we all have. That's not exactly the same, obviously, but essentially, if it is a choice, and we all don't walk around with our genetic information on on our forehead, it's and then living in the context of the Americas, where to varying degrees, depending on which nation state you were born in, there's this concept of hypo descent, which I mentioned in my paper. There's just mixed race people are faced with the same choice. If I can choose to be in the African club or not, then right? Because I'm sure there's some other blood up in there that's not African, and but my heritage, the heritage I identify with, the historical identity I identify with, my consciousness, and obviously my politics is oriented toward Africa. So I'm ready to find that new name. I think part of what I think the young folks we should be thinking about in terms of the younger folks is related to that. It's related to encouraging them, kind of as Njiba said, to identify with Africa as the homeland, which is with hashtag ADOS and all these other. It's getting more and more confusing. We're, in some ways, there's a segment of our population that's moving backwards, rapidly. So I think making sure that we keep Africa at the center of our historical understanding of ourselves and do the study so that we can, when we do get to making that decision, that we're coming from an informed place, even if we don't find 100% agreement, that we're all invested in kind of global African advancement. That has to be kind of at the forefront. And that's why Pan-Africanism is so important. I also wanted to relate a short experience I had with a friend of mine who I will not name, who was being asked to apply for a job at the CIA. No, it wasn't the CIA. It was the State Department. He's an African Diaspora scholar, and he was being asked to work in a project that focuses on Pan-Africanism. It was a whole unit devoted to looking at Pan-Africanism, surveilling Pan-Africanist organizations globally. He speaks many languages, and so that was the point, to be able to look at what Pan-African organizations with that phrase in the title, that phrase in the event, that phrase in the literature, to keep an eye on those organizations and to really understand what they're up to. So the fact that our government is still so deeply concerned with Pan-Africanism means it's something that we really have to pay attention to. There may be a power and a potential there that they see that we're starting to lose sight of. So I think it's really important for us to keep that central in our teaching, even hearing you talk about your class, Jared, and how you guys are, discussing Kwame Ture, and you put your message out there for your students. Like, I'm like, okay, so I have a couple of units where we talk about Pan-Africanist thinkers in my class, but I don't know if I've done a good enough job really explaining it as an ideology, as a movement. You know what I mean? As an objective. So I really have to kind of go back and reinforce that. So that's one of the things we can do as educators. And with the film, I think at the end of the day, Black Panther, I didn't see a lot of Black people like kind of rush and join the CIA or anything. I think Black folks in this country tend to be more conservative than we'd like to admit. So I don't think it dug us any deeper into a hole that we weren't already in terms of this patriotic, weird American exceptionalism. But I do think it did get us to start thinking about Africa. Like, I'm in these other groups on Facebook and social media that kind of talk about films. I'm watching Lovecraft Country, this new Black sci-fi series on TV, which is really fascinating. And I'm pleasantly surprised because this Lovecraft Country group, it's almost 5,000 members, but they're so deeply interested in studying African culture, history, and it's not just US centric. And I thought it would be. And I really was kind of afraid of that. But I see like them constantly referring back to Black Panther. They're constantly referring back to Beyonce's Black is King. They're constantly referencing all these other globally Black art forms and saying, I wanted to know more about that. I wanted to know more about that. Where'd that come from? What's that history? So they actually asked me to be like an administrator of the group because I had these comments. So now people want articles and books to read. I mean, so there is an impact that I think we shouldn't devalue, even as we critique the media landscape that this all kind of comes from.
Professor Konadu, I definitely want to hear from you. All I would want to say is that for me, this is the point regarding the message or the intent of the propaganda products or that film in particular, that Kwame Ture used to talk about all the time that there was a natural tendency among African people towards Pan-Africanism that has to constantly be blunted and worked against. And even as I was thinking about this class, there's been so much, even among commercial gangster rappers, of positive references to Africa, historically in hip hop, and even somewhat recently, for me at least, I was thinking the Styles P song, this is a gangster rapper. This is gangster rapper, but he's doing songs about never mess with an African. I can't remember the title, but that was the refrain of the song. There is this general tendency towards Pan-Africanism that I think commercial media has to constantly, like with so many other issues, not omit as an issue, but manage in terms of its delivery. So that's why I think in Black Panther, we do see the very anti-Lumumba nonprofit response, of the turning over the resources to the CIA as a culmination of the film, with the installation of a arts program in the hood as a response to centuries of African exploitation. Again, so because people have that tendency, so the response has to be to try to. And the same thing that I think with any tendency, particularly in this country, where one drop makes person Black. I could never be Black in Latin America or anywhere else. In fact, quite the opposite. The one drop of whiteness identifies you separately on almost every other part of the world. So, but the tendency towards Pan-African unity that creates here has had to be met with a whole entire political movement, of course, in part led by white mothers of Black children, to say we need to recategorize these people out of Blackness for our own sensibilities. Anyway, I've said more than I intended to. Dr. Konadu, please chime in.
Sure thing, and I appreciate everything that's been said. Let me try to frame this with a sense of what's at stake. I'm an historian, so that's part of what I do in terms of the academy, and anyone who has read my work will sort of know that. So, in the 19th century in Brazil, the largest collective space of people of African ancestry, right, in the Americas, this governor of Rio de Janeiro, Rui Barbosa, said this: This is in the context of burning most of the documents having to do with transatlantic slavery, intentionally burning the documents. And when this Portuguese princess, essentially certified this golden law that so-called emancipated the people of African ancestry in 1888. But Rui Barbosa said this, which I think is very crucial here. He said that the creation of the mulatto was a victory for the whites. And I want you to think about that.
Could you read that again?
Sure,
I'm sorry.
Sure. He said, it's a translation from Portuguese. He said, essentially, the creation of the mulatto was a victory for the whites. And I want us to really just to think about that, because that's not a statement about ethnicity or belonging or about ancestry. It's a statement of war. And that's the context that I think many of us, is hard to grapple with when we think in terms of, or through our emotion, that I have to decide, I don't want to choose my multiple heritages. I think that's a delusion of not grasping that this is a longitudinal war, right? Africans, by and large, didn't ask for a first-class ticket to be transferred from their communities and their families and their natal communities into this part of the world, right? The vast majority, and this is from my count, you can read my book, Transatlantic Africa, the vast majority of Africans who left any record or account in multiple languages all talk about the connection with their family. And all of them say that they were snatched in either a raid sponsored or initiated or facilitated by the white folks on the coast. And so listen, the vast majority are actually war captives. And this is the thing that I think we have to keep at the forefront, that we are involved in a multi-layered array of war. This is a longitudinal war. It's a long-standing war. And at the heart of it is the idea that you have to kill the very thing that defines these people and hold them together, which is their culture, which is the basis of their belief about who they are. And as such, it's less about whether they are quote unquote Africans. It is much so of what that term actually belies. What is a stand-in for? What is it? What it's a placeholder for? And that's why I argue that African is a bridge, right? Because it's not our creation, but it's a stand-in. It's like the zero in arithmetic. It's a placeholder, right? And that's something is the target of that war. If you can get these people out of their rational, sane minds, out of their homelands, and essentially begin to, basically fight each other for 500 years about who's African and who's not, which is a debate on their terms. And so anyone, and I'm not blaming my colleague Jared, because it's not his term, but the very idea of a mixed race, is a discourse that is a dead end. There's nothing can be recuperated from that. And so my thing is that we have to understand that this is, part of the toolkit of the arsenal of warfare, right? And tantamount to that is upending, these people from that place called Africa out of their righteous mind, out of their resources, as Jiva noted, out of the thing that is the cohesive glue to their selfhood, which is what Sister Iyele talked about. That meaning maker that culture provides. The only confusion, and this is my last point here, the only confusion here is a confusion of culture. And I don't mean the culture that ministries of culture perform for tourism. I mean that sort of deep-seated sense, that is rooted in ancestry, that you see through dreams, that you see when you're in a room and you just feel the sense that, that brother or sister, I can connect with them. That's what I'm talking about. It's the thing that you can't put in the laboratory. It's the thing that you can't, put into, a single authored book or report. It's the thing that you cannot control. And that's why precisely the missionaries were dispatched, because the threshold for control is belief. Once you believe that you are bounded to the rules of the game that they have created, then you've already lost. And all that verbiage about mixed race, about, I have multiple heritages, I have some Cherokee blood in me, I have some white blood in me. all of that is simply the delusions of not understanding this is a war for which, you are simply a casualty of that discourse if we don't understand that this is a war.
Look, I'm cognizant of the time, but there's so much, I'll just throw this out there. I don't know that we can address it because a lot of the questions coming in that we still have not gotten to revolve around the HBCU and its role in all of this and what can be done by those engaged with the HBCUs in whatever form to make an advance. But one of the issues, because part of the way I understood our question this month was about the effectiveness of Blackness and Pan-Africanism as organizing tools. And in listening to you, Professor Konadu, one of the as much as I agree with what you just said, again, forgive the personalization, but I have come to think that at times, at least tactically, for as I've had to consider my own shift in phenotype here, is that there is a detriment to the politics and the broader goal of organizing when, at times, at least, someone like me, looking like me, advocates these politics in certain spaces. That the war that I may be aware of, as it relates to my own identity or those similarly situated, has an effect, so to speak, on those you're trying to organize. And when they see somebody who looks a certain way, dressed a certain, if I walk in with my African clothing and my, if I really do it up, when I go to work, for instance, continental Africans looking like, what the hell is he doing? When I had a white colleague some years ago who was formerly married to a Black person with whom they had a child, saw me in an African top one day, and this fully white person said, you know what? I got to get mine out and start wearing them again. You look good in yours. I felt like I had done a disservice, honestly, to the movement because my wearing that was not meant to inspire. Anyway, so I'm just saying tactically, there is something I think that I at least feel forced to consider in all of this as we consider the war, even as I have spent time in Southern Africa and talked to members of the so-called colored community who look as dark and Black as anybody on these screens, but who are very clear that they have been created, as using their own language, by white imperialism to kill off the African Revolution. Anyways, so in any effort to respond to any of that by any of you, I would like you to also consider what are coming in several of these questions of the role of the HBCU, as we brought up already, as being a space where some of these issues can be properly dealt with and advanced. I have my own series and set of critiques about that and concerns about that, but let me just stop there for a second and invite any of you to do that and to respond to that. And by the way, if anybody wants to be invited on stage, so to speak, in our audience to raise a question or comment, please just let us know and we can go ahead and bring you up to do that if submitting your comment in writing isn't getting the job done. Does anybody have an immediate? Yeah, go ahead. Wait.
Excuse me, Njiba, did you want to go?
Oh, did you raise? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to be very brief because I think that there's two things. There's been some chat about sort of identity and I think that it's important to raise these kind of questions, right? And I think it's important to kind of contextualize some of the things. And I think Kwesi did a good job with kind of contextualizing this quote that he said about, mulattoes are like a victory for the white race kind of thing, right? And so I think that it's important for us to contextualize this in that there's one's individual identity based on their culture and their heritage, right? And then there's this larger collective identity and culture, which can positively or negatively benefit us as African people. And what I'm suggesting, I'm not sure if Kwesi is suggesting this, but what I'm suggesting is that there has been over the last few years a push for this anti-African identity, which ultimately takes many people who would be pro-African and would be looking towards Africa and towards Pan-Africanism away from this African identity, because there's been such a push for anti-African identity, right? And I just want to say this, and what's happening is popular culture, popular media, education is using individuals who have multiple heritage or multiple races as a scapegoat, right, for this anti-African propaganda. Let's be clear about that, right? To suggest that one should not identify with being African, or one should celebrate all of their heritage, that ultimately is saying you shouldn't also be African, because there's so much negative propaganda around being African. That's one. And so I think that that's important. And this is not just about someone who has multiple heritage or multiple cultures or a mixed race. These are also things that African people who have two African parents, whether they're born in Ghana, born in Toronto, wherever they happen to be born, also grapple with. So
you saying we can't do all lives matter?
No, we cannot do all lives matter. So fundamentally, I think that that's an important point, right? That this is not about the individual and the individual's choice. This is a larger institutional question about the anti-African propaganda. And then I think that I wanted to say something else, but that's all.
Kwesi, were you going to say something? Oh, Yeli, go ahead. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay, Kwesi.
Oh, okay. So very quickly to your question about HBCU and this ongoing thing. So no, I don't think HBCUs, excuse me, as presently configured, can be that hub for essentially incubating, the kind of Pan-Africanism coordinated action, because they in fact work against clarifying the who and the whom. And at the base of it, their record, which is all we have to go on, has shown that they have no vested interest in doing so, unless it can increase their profile within the U.S. empire. And so as presently configured, I think that's another dead end. And second, and finally for this point, so we can hear from Yele, that precisely the discussion we're having, the questions being raised in the chat that I can see, it's so hard to extricate ourselves from the very discourses that deny our being. And so in the very instances that we're talking about, well, who belongs and who doesn't, who's African, who's not, that is precisely what the discourse, is constructed to do. It's constructed to atomize us. It's to make us feel, as Njibi said, as individuals and individual freedom, and all of these particular viruses that work against, this sort of coordinated longitudinal and certainly transnational action. And so what I'm saying is that, more than just simply the specter of war, it is also the very discourses that we're embedded in without actually fully, I think, not fully, but at least relatively realizing that some of my questions and my thinking is actually a function of the discourse that I'm in, right? And that's why I'm said by the analogy that we're lions, fighting about the corner of the cage, but we're in a cage in a zoo. So the two, hurdles that we have to jump, and I'm saying the way to do that is for those people who are the direct descendants who feel it not, in other words, we can't use the metrics of ancestry.com, right? I'm saying in their spirit, right? In their ancestry, they're acting upon something that they feel and they see, not simply for, promotion or tenure, right? And by action, I mean, if we can use yourself, Jared, it's the work over a period of time that have demonstrated commitment, right? And so it is culture plus commitment that say, hey, this is, what it is. This is what, my choice is, because we can't choose when we're born what we're named. We can't choose our parents. We can't reverse engineer that. So there's things that we cannot choose. But what I'm saying, what we can choose is that I, unambiguously will take that bridge, African, to get to that place, where I can reinscribe myself, in on the terms that is befitting, is what I'm saying.
Mjiba, did you, or Yeli, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, I'm really digging this discussion. I think so. I'm not ready to completely throw HBCUs in the trash. I agree and echo all of the sentiments about the good Negro factories that they are. Hugh Masekela would say that this is these are bad imitations of white institutions, right? So there is that. There's the conservative, pro-American, anti-Black, anti-Pan-Africanist, anti-Black nationalist sentiment that exists across all HBCUs with no exception. But at the same time, this is something Dr. Carr explained to me when I was at Howard University that really marked my experience there. What we do have at HBCUs and what they do provide is a convening of Black people. And as much as we have a strong critique of the institution and the official record of that institution, there is always the grassroots, there's always the unofficial that also exists within that space where you have Black people. I am not one of the your typical Howard elites, right? Going there. And I found a community of people who were trying to subvert the official purpose of that institution, the official mission of that institution, and use that convening as an opportunity to find like-minded Africans and work on campus and off campus toward Pan-African liberation, and did the committed work and devoted the time, did practice deep culture. And that would include people like Chadwick. That was his origin. That's what his life really was about. And so I think that provided an opportunity for me that I wouldn't have had if I had gone to another institution, perhaps. And so we have to think about how we, if you look at, I just want to drop the name, the Towards a Black University Conference of '68 at Howard, and them revisiting this in 2008 at Howard to really think about what a Black university should be if we have these critiques, right? So that has also been a conversation at Howard and at other HBCUs about how do, the Institute for the Black World, there have been other manifestations of other educational spaces that we can have where we can have that same convening that is about these goals, that is about meeting these objectives. So I just wanted to say that. On the mixed race question, obviously I don't have a dog, obviously, in that fight, in terms of like my direct parentage. But I did want to say the notion of colorism did come up when I was thinking about Howard University and some of the problems that we have in these institutions. And going back to a point that Kwesi said that was super important, and a point I also tried to make in my paper about that ineffable Africanness, that untouchable place, that unique gift of the race that people like Carter G. Woodson also mentioned. I think wherever we are, when we convene, that is present, and we always have that. We have access to that if we intentionally seek it out and continue to build with that. And I think with the colorism piece, like I was thinking about his historical reference to kind of coastal Africa and the transatlantic trade, and how, there were also these intentional mixed race children created by the slave trading classes of people along the coast. Europeans would literally, like the Lanzalos, and they would make babies with African women primarily. But what the value was of these mixed race children was their Africanness, was their access to that place that Europeans couldn't go. Having connections to those African lineages that they wanted to infiltrate and go deeper and deeper into the continent, having African ancestry. And so because of that, for ultimately for the detriment of Africans, right? But I still see it as the value of even mixed race people of African descent is that they still have that access that we all have. They still have access, a connection to those lineages. A connection to the heritage, a connection to the culture that has been valuable for the rest of the world, but still also remains valuable for African people. So it can be a weaponized thing, right? Like mixed race people, that mixed race category of identity has been used against the African movement, but there's a way to, again, subvert that and try to like kind of focus on the value there, because that's where we connect, you know, that's where they connect back to the rest of us. Colorism is another barrier to that. Colorism is, you know, similar to the whole mixed race category, but y'all know that already. So that was all.
Well, I mean, I think that was great. And I think a lot of what you said speaks to the struggle and the dialectic, as some might put it, that we're struggling with here, because as I'm hearing you talk about the convening and the positive aspects of the convening, of course, there's also the negative, that the convening has also been encouraged by the estate and the establishment as a way of imposing collective consciousness on Black communities. We know that, you know, even from William Corson's work of a couple decades ago, they literally put white faculty and students at Howard's campus to surveil, to see were Black students going to become revolutionaries, or could they be co-opted into the state apparatus. So, and it goes, and same thing with the point of propaganda. There is the intent maybe of the institution of the HBCU, which is maybe not so good. But as you point out, there are ways that the dialectic also swings to the other side, where Africans can use the convening for something else. And I think that's where interventions like these, what we're doing here, extra institutional gatherings, can help penetrate those spaces to say, while you're there, this is what you got to do. Sister Mjiba, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, and I just kind of want to piggyback off of what you're saying. It's not about the institution. First of all, I went to a PWI for my first degree and my master's. And my master's program, I was getting a master's in social work, and those European students put together a petition to get me kicked out of the program because they were afraid that I am not lying, California State University, Sacramento, I am not afraid to say it. Okay, I graduated in 2000, and they put a petition to get me kicked out because they were afraid, because I was challenging the fact that the social work program at Sac State was filled with all white women. I also at the time happened to be in the AAPRP, which compounded issues for those Europeans. Now and at that very institution, my thesis was titled Modern Day Slavery. And I looked at how ultimately the social work system was like modern day slavery for Black and brown children. Now, I'm saying that to say, at San Jose State University, Brother Akabundu is on this call. Brother Akabundu and the APRP organized me and propagandized me with Sister Nehanda from when I started in 1992 until when I graduated in 1997. And actually before that, let me say, and I'm saying this to say it's not where you are, it's who you engage with, right? And that's what's important. Let me actually say that before that, when I was in high school, a member of the AAPRP was politically educating me inside African American studies classes at Berkeley High School. So before I even got to Howard in my PhD, like Kwesi, who was a couple years ahead of me in African studies, politically I was already advanced. Not because of the institution I went to, but because of the organizations on the institution's campus, which politically educated me to look towards Africa, look towards Pan-Africanism. So the thing is, you can have a PWI or HBCU, and who is organizing on or around the campus is going to impact one's level of political education. And so I think that that's also important, right? To note that this is not a question about HBCU versus PWI. These are both neo-colonial institutions in the U.S. imperialist state. The question is, what organizations are taking the campus and organizing it and transforming the political education and ideology of students on campus? And what I might add is, if in fact faculty like ourselves are on campus and not toting the line and pushing that we decolonize, as Paulo Freire said, use education for transformation. In my opinion, that is what makes the difference between a liberated or a contested zone or an enemy held zone. It doesn't matter whether it's a HBCU or PWI, because they all get money from the same people. Yes, at HBCUs, you can convene and you can do all these things, but the U.S. Army's on HBCUs recruiting too. So is the CIA and so is the FBI. So is the APRP, by the way.
So officially, we only have about 5 minutes left. I, for one, want to. I'll close my own commentary by saying I thank all of our attendees and my wonderful colleagues for this convening, and want to invite people to stay in touch with the Blacklash Collective via Crowdcast here. You can email us at blacklashcollective@gmail.com. If you do follow us here on Crowdcast, you'll be able to be automatically alerted for our next town hall, which will be roughly a month from now. And you can also revisit past town hall gatherings that you may have missed. So that concludes it for me. I greatly thank all of you, and I want to give anybody, all of my comrades here, a chance to offer their concluding remarks for tonight. And including bringing Todd back on to do the same, who's been, gallantly manning the chat. Yes, Professor Conadu, go right ahead.
All right, so I'll go quickly so Todd can come in. So you can drop me and let Todd come in. Thanks to everyone as well, colleagues and part of the broader collective. So if folks take nothing away from this convening in this space, it should be that we have an ancestrally formed choice to make, and by that I mean we're not making a choice for this moment for 2020. We're making a choice for millennia, and I want to frame it that way because that means that we are the sum total of all the people that came before us, and we did not choose who our grandparents or parents mated with for whatever conditions or reason. But what we can choose is to act upon that long, as Fukuyama used to say to me in Kikongo, that long biogenetic rope that connects us to this infinite mass of ancestry, and it's to activate it, to move on it, and to be unambiguous. And by doing so, we provide the groundwork for this collective Pan-Africanist consciousness and work that I think would definitely do justice and honor Brother Chadwick Boseman on the other side.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you. Sister Njiba, thank you for that, Brother Kwesi.
Yes, I will very, very briefly, because I know his time is up, I'll say three things. I'll say one, as Amilcar Cabral said, from Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, we must return to the source. We know the source is Africa, unequivocally. We must return to the source in mind, body, and soul. I'll also say forward to Pan-Africanism.
All right, right on. Thank you very much. Sister Iyele?
Yeah, I just have a bunch of slogans. Free the land, free your mind, and free your spirit. Ancestors over everything. Rest in power, Chad. Thank you so much. I had a really wonderful time with this discussion. I echo everything that my panelists have said. I've been enjoying the chat. So many brilliant people are with us. So thank you for allowing me to continue to be with this group. It's an honor, guys.
Likewise, I will take the moderator's privilege and end with this, with again something I quoted earlier from you, Dr. Ichile, because again I want to end by raising up Brother Boseman's work and legacy, and I really appreciated how you put it here, that he devoted his life, his personal and professional choices, to the maintenance of Blackness, the invocation of Pan-African identity, and as you also put to focus on the Black fantastic. And I think that we've done a fairly good job of trying to raise that up and carry it on. So thank you all very much. And to those who were in attendance and those who watch this later on the replay, thank you for doing so. And again, we look forward to being in touch. And as Fred Hampton used to always say, to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and we'll catch you in the whirlwind. Thanks, everybody. Take care.